What's going on, guys? It's me, Zach, bringing you guys another fantasy football video. It's just under 1 week before the NFL draft, so I'm going to try and finish up all of these offseason recaps for you guys pretty soon here. I'm going to be touching on the AFC West in this video. I've finished up the entire NFC already, so if you haven't watched those videos, please do take a minute to go take a look at them. Should be a good refresher for you guys in terms of what's happened this offseason, sort of help keep you guys up to date on what the fantasy implications of all that were. We'll be rattling off the next four here pretty soon, making sure we have all of those covered before the NFL draft next Thursday. And then the following week, we'll make sure we get all this draft recap and start maybe talk a little bit of dynasty as well and see what the impact of these draft picks are and talk about rookies and how excited we are for those guys as well and what their impact is going to be on other players around them. So yeah, with that being said, really enjoying making these videos. I know it's really early to be thinking about fantasy football, but I never really stopped thinking about it. And if you're watching this, you're probably the same way. So yeah, really love this stuff. Really love making these videos. I think it's one of the best ways to make sure you're poised and ready to go when the start of the season comes because you've been up to date and staying up with the times throughout the entire offseason is going to be a big edge for you when the season actually starts. So yeah, thank you guys for taking the time to watch the video. And with that, let's get into the Las Vegas Raiders. So let's start off here with the Las Vegas Raiders. They've been one of the busier teams in free agency so far this season. They added Jacoby Myers, Jimmy Garoppolo, a couple of nice lower end receivers in DeAndre Carter and Philip Dorsett, and they've also reworked their tight end room because they lost Darren Waller. It should be noted also, obviously, having signed Jimmy Garoppolo, they did lose Derek Carr. In general, I think that's going to be a pretty lateral move for them at quarterback. I do personally believe that Derek Carr is a little bit better of a quarterback, especially from a fantasy standpoint. He's just statistically put up larger numbers for teams, but Garoppolo's fine. He's not a large enough downgrade that I really think that makes a huge impact on this offense. So, assuming that he is the starter for them throughout the entire course of the season, I think it's going to be pretty safe to say that Devontae Adams is still going to be that top 10, probably near top 5 receiver. He's just an elite talent, and it almost doesn't really matter who's throwing the ball to Devontae Adams. Jacoby Myers coming in sort of muddies the water for anyone else, I think. You've got Jacoby Myers and Hunter Renfrow that'll be sort of battling it out for targets. Those will be guys that'll have their own weeks, but honestly, I don't think either one of those guys is going to be a super consistent producer. So they're going to be guys that you can sort of pick up as like a bench option coming into your NFL or into your fantasy drafts, and then maybe there'll be guys that have value in games where one or two other receivers miss the games. I don't think any of these tight ends really going to have any value. Hooper's he's decent, he's smart, he's a smart player, but he's not going to be a huge fantasy producer. And OJ Howard's just not quite what he was after that rookie season, so not a whole lot to cover there. And then as far as the running back position goes, obviously Josh Jacobs was franchise tagged. We'll see if he holds out. I doubt he will. He's probably going to play the season on the franchise tag and then go elsewhere, but we saw how great Josh Jacobs was last season. I don't have any reason to believe that he'll be anything short of a top 5 running back again this season. Sort of on the flip side of what the Raiders did this offseason, the Los Angeles Chargers did honestly next to nothing. They've added pretty much nobody from last season in terms of improvements over their team last season. They did lose a little bit of depth at wide receiver, having lost DeAndre Carter, who was actually a pretty nice piece for them last season. They did re-sign Jalen Guyton recently, so I think he's just going to be that same role there. He's going to be that deep threat for them this season. And they've been pretty vocal about wanting to add another receiver to this team. They do have pick 21, so I think a lot of people expect them to take a wide receiver there. They've been linked to Jordan Addison quite a bit, and I wouldn't be shocked to see them take him there. Personally, I don't think that's going to mean a ton. It probably just means that Keenan Allen's going to be like a low-end wide receiver 1, high-end wide receiver 2. Mike Williams is still going to be that like really boomer bust wide receiver 2, and then none of the other receivers really do a whole lot. It does pretty much knock Joshua Palmer out of the realm of being a useful player just because you're going to have another warm body that's actually good at football in there if Jordan Addison or another receiver is drafted. So it would muddy the waters for me with those receiver positions, but Keenan Allen's good enough that he'd still be pretty unfazed by getting a rookie brought in, and then Mike Williams is so boomer bust anyway that I don't think a whole lot changes there. This offense would look a little bit better if they had a little bit more depth at the wide receiver position, so it might be a little bit of a bump for Justin Herbert. He did have to struggle through having a lot of injuries at the receiver position last season. Maybe that would help be them a little bit more consistent. And then one thing I do want to touch on is that they have been mentioned as a team that could lose Austin Eckler in this free agency cycle. I don't think that's going to happen, but Los Angeles has been pretty adamant about not wanting to extend him. They don't think he's necessarily going to be worth paying that money, and I can't really blame him. He's getting up there in age, and it's just tough to justify spending up on this running back on the running back position in today's NFL. So Eckler's been a little frustrated there, but I expect him to be back. If he were to leave, they don't really have anyone there right now that would really fill that void. So that would make them a pretty prime destination to add a running back if for whatever reason over the next week or two or before the NFL draft we do see them trade Eckler. That would mean that they'd be a pretty prime position for Bijan to go, or maybe a Zach Charbonnet or Jameer Gibbs to be an heir apparent there. So keep an eye on what they do with the running back position. I don't think that as long as Eckler's there, there's going to be a true workhorse that gets drafted by them. But if they do spend up on a running back there, it would mean that Eckler's days in Los Angeles are probably numbered, and then you could certainly plan for the future there. Moving on to the Kansas City Chiefs, they're another team that really hasn't done a whole lot this offseason, and honestly, they don't really have the cap space to do much, and they honestly don't need to do much either. They're the Kansas City Chiefs. They just won another Super Bowl, and they're going to be great again next season. They did lose some wide receiver depth in this offseason. They lost Juju and McCole Hardman, so they're going to be a little bit thinner at the wide receiver position that they already didn't have a ton of studs at. So sort of backfill there, they did get Richie James from New York. He was actually a really solid player for the Giants last season. I like him quite a bit. I don't think he's going to be super fantasy relevant. He'll probably have a couple weeks. He'll maybe be like a poor man's Juju from last year. So that's not super sexy. I wouldn't expect a whole lot from him, but he's a decent little player. He'll have some weeks. I don't hate it. And they still have, to date, lost Jerick McKinnon. He was really valuable for them last season. He's been a really good pass catcher for them, and he was honestly just super good in fantasy as well last season. But if he is gone, which I think it's still pretty reasonable to assume they're going to bring him back. Maybe they're waiting to see what happens with the NFL draft before they do that. But if he is gone and Isaiah Pacheco is still the lead back there, he'd be a guy that I'd be looking at as like maybe a top 15 running back going into next season if he has a stranglehold in that position there. Again, I highly doubt that's how it stays throughout the course of the rest of this offseason, just because it seems like organizational malpractice to go into an NFL season with just Isaiah Pacheco as your running back. I know they've got Spencer Ware, or is it Spencer Gore, and really nobody else at the running back position. So they're going to add somebody, and I would expect that to sort of take away value from Pacheco, especially given that draft capital. It's just tough for guys with that pedigree to really keep a hold on the snaps that Pacheco was getting last season. And then one other thing I do want to touch on is DeAndre Hopkins. He's been pretty much exclusively linked to the Chiefs and the Bills as a trade destination for him. If he were to go to Kansas City, that to me would be just absolutely fantastic for the fantasy value of DeAndre Hopkins. He would be a clear alpha in terms of the wide receiver room there, and it would help take some pressure off of Travis Kelce as well. It would raise Patrick Mahomes' ceiling even a little more, which is crazy to say, but regardless, I think you're obviously going to have Patrick Mahomes. He's going to be the number 1, 2, or 3 quarterback in fantasy next year. You can rank it however you want between him, Hurts, and Josh Allen. And then Kelsey's going to be the clear tight end 1 again. And there's not going to be really any useful receivers here, I think. They're going to be consistent. I think if we're going to take a bet on which receiver is going to be the most valuable here, it would probably be Kadarius Toney, just because we've seen that he's a really good player, but I don't really want to bet on him staying healthy. It's just going to be a battle for him, I think. And yeah, so if they don't add DeAndre Hopkins, I think this wide receiver room is going to be one that we can pretty much ignore next season. And then if they do add DeAndre Hopkins, he's going to be a wide receiver 1. And regardless, outside of that, Travis Kelce is the tight end 1. Mahomes is the top 3 quarterback. And there will be probably some low-end running back 2 value out of the running back position here, but it just depends on who that body is. And last but not least here, we've got the Denver Broncos. They were, again, not a team super active this offseason, but at the same time they were. They just weren't super active in terms of a fantasy perspective. They added Sean Payton as their head coach, and they added Samaje Perine and Marquez Callaway. Samaje Perine does look like he is in line to be their pass-catching running back, and honestly, I would expect him to have a role at the start of the season. They still haven't brought back Latavius Murray, so as it stands, their depth chart is pretty much Javonte Williams, Samaje Perine, and Tyler Beatty. So there's not a whole lot there in Denver at the running back position. I would be shocked to see them leave the draft without adding another body, or at least adding someone else in free agency as well, just because we don't know what the status of Javonte is. If they do add nobody, I think it would be a pretty strong indicator that they're confident that Javonte's going to be back to start the season. But in whatever case, Sean Payton has always gotten a ton of value out of the running back position for his team, so I think there's going to be a lot of value to be had here. If Javonte is himself, he's going to be an absolutely smash dominant running back again this season, but we haven't really seen players come back from an injury of his status that quickly, so I personally would expect him to sort of ramp up, be sort of like a J.K. Dobbins situation from last season, and we're going to see Samaje Perine maybe have some nice weeks earlier on in the season. I think Perine is actually a pretty good player. Adding Marquez Callaway doesn't do a whole lot for me. He's going to be their wide receiver 4, probably behind Tim Patrick, Courtland Sutton, and Jerry Jeudy. And it's really tough to gauge what this offense is going to look like because we know it was just absolutely disastrous for them last season. I do believe that Russell Wilson is still a good quarterback. I believe that Sean Payton is a really good NFL head coach and a good offensive head coach. So I think that they're going to turn this around. They're not going to be a top 5 offense, but I think they can be in the top half. Russ maybe won't be a Pro Bowler this season, but I think he'll be a decent enough quarterback to really support these weapons. I think you're going to see Jerry Jeudy be like a middle tier wide receiver 2, Cortland Sutton will be like a wide receiver 3, and Tim Patrick be like a wide receiver 4. And I think you'll see Javonte Williams be like a low end running back 2 throughout the course of the season. Russ will probably be in that same tier as guys like Derek Carr from a fantasy perspective. So nothing sexy, but this is going to be an offense that's good enough, especially with that defense. I do expect the Broncos to win some games this season. They're probably a 10 or 11 win team this season, and there certainly is plenty of upside there as well. Russ could certainly find himself and be great again. In that case, this offense would absolutely explode. There'd be a lot of opportunity for value here. And I will point out that although they're not mentioned here, the Broncos did spend immediately at the start of free agency a ton of money on addressing their offensive line. They got a new right tackle and a new offensive guard, so it's quite possible this offensive line actually ends up being very improved from last season, and that would mean a lot for this offense. They were the most sacked team in the NFL last season, and I think that there's plenty of reason to believe that's going to get fixed a little bit this season, and honestly, they can only go up from here. I'd expect there to be maybe quite a bit of value found in these players throughout the course of drafts this next season, just because a lot of people are going to see the stink from this team last season and just want nothing to do with it. So if you're willing to take that gamble, I think there could be an opportunity there. So that'll do it for the AFC West. The next video I'll be getting out will be the AFC South. I'll try and get that up on Sunday, and then I'll be able to get you guys a video on Monday and Wednesday, so that you guys are all prepared for the NFL Draft. I really had a good time doing this series. It's helped keep me refreshed as well. Like I said, if this is your first time on the channel, please do take a minute to like the video, subscribe to the channel if you want more content. Please click the bell as well so you get notifications when I put out new videos. I think I'm at 307 subscribers right now, and I've got a goal of hitting 1,000 by the end of this regular season, so it's probably a pretty lofty goal, but it's one I've had for a while, and I think we can shoot for it and finally get there this year. So yeah, with that, I want to thank you again for taking the time to watch the video, and I'll catch you next time.